What's up guys, welcome back to a new video. The translations finally dropped for Ragnarok chapter 58. This month's chapter as a whole was solely focused on the fight yet again, with some very cool action, learning more about Huang's power, which is pretty interesting. And prior to this, I wasn't really subscribing to the theory that this fight would be a draw, but considering the explanation of Huang's power this chapter, I am leaning towards the possibility that this fight could be the first draw of the tournament. And I wouldn't even complain too much if it was a draw, because prior to this my prediction was Hades winning. So far Huang's been more appealing and I'm enjoying him much more compared to Hades. If this fight was a draw, it could be pretty cool and will mix up the tournament for later on fights in a more appealing way for me personally. But if you're new here and enjoy Ragnarok, make sure you're subscribed. I make regular videos on this series on the channel. Leave a like. Now let's get into it. At the end of chapter 57, we had Huang losing his blindfold, but smiling after taking some damage from Hades like an absolute mad lad. And then Hades begins a fight. A lot of exchanges throughout this chapter are very fast. There's no like talking in between. They both just face one another, they clash, and then instantly after that they're back facing one another. Very close and powerful blows, which is personally very enjoyable for me. It's not that whole like generic anime thing where they use one ability, they talk for 5 minutes and then continue. It's this constant action, which is pretty cool. Hades respects Huang for his smile as expected from a king and then charges him. And panels like this where we see like the perspective and impact of his spear strikes, it is very cool to see. But this time Huang's able to dodge all of them, with Gold questioning whether he sustained that much damage he can't really fight back anymore. But Brynhilda points out that he's waiting for something, for an opportunity to use that technique again. Again, these panels, this is very sick, I love to see it. Huang dodging him like a madman, but we do see the sheer power of Hades' strikes. I am wanting a little bit more from Hades. So far in this fight, they've been around equal, but Huang's got a lot more shine and has been more appealing as a whole. But Hades, even though he's been quite simple, has been demonstrating his very powerful strikes and how dangerous he truly is. He uses a named technique and says, try to block it. Huang is struggling, then proceeds to actually counter it. We see his eyes light up with these stars and a whole lot of breathing going on. And then he sends out this little air puff on Hades, weakening him according to Ares and allowing himself to actually grab Hades' weapon and swing him around using the armor form and the name technique Heavenly Hand of Defense yet again, and slam him on the ground with Hades coughing up some blood. But again, as I mentioned, very fast pace without delay. After doing that, Huang is charging him yet again and Hades is already back up charging as well. Huang dodges like an absolute madman and we see both of them kinda clash one another in this instance. Hades is damaged somewhat, or the first one to have notable damage, and questions how Huang was able to redirect his attack this time. As you know, last chapter, this is where Huang actually took the damage and had to remove his blindfold, everything like that. But then we see out of nowhere Huang also takes some damage. This is explained later in the chapter, so just take note of that. But again, without much delay, no like moaning about the damage sustained, they continue fighting. And it's very clear Hades is quite tanky, surviving these blows. Yes, bleeding quite a bit, but it seems more than ready to go, while Huang actually does kinda scream in pain a little bit, showing yet again the difference between god durability and human durability. The sustainability that have been a lot better. It's been covered in so many fights at this point, it's kinda as expected. But this time Huang charges him head on, with Hades mentioning that this is his domain of combat, so a very close range specialist or head-to-head combat specialist perhaps. I'm still wanting to learn more about Hades. Hopefully we get a flashback in next month's chapter. But we see Huang breathe in and then sending out the same puff of air which actually hits Hades again. And this time we actually see or get a better understanding of how it kinda stuns him a little bit. Or I should say weakened him, and it's also looking like it caught him off guard and maybe made him slower with this panel here of Huang dodging, setting up the perfect chance to use his spear form. Actually used the like things on his finger for an attack, Something to mention is those were on his body before he actually got the Valkyrie volume, so there may be something unique about them that could be mentioned later on. I know there was a theory going around the fandom before this fight actually occurred that would have like poison properties, and landing directly on Hades here could be pretty deadly for the later portions of the fight. If I predict it here, that's going to be pretty cool. But he's able to outplay Hades in this situation and land the named attack Mount Tai Dragonclaw, sending Hades flying. And speaking of Mount Tai, in the most recent Kengan Omega chapter, we have Edward Wu, who also used a technique that started with Mount Tai, which is pretty funny. But landing this attack actually freaks everyone out. We see the likes of Sasaki and Okita as well, which is pretty cool, and some of the other Chinese dudes. This time we see Hades actually bleeding quite a bit, the most damaging blow of this fight so far, I'd like to say, and that this attack left its mark on the king of the Netherworld. Hermes mentions that this is certainly out of the ordinary, and then we have the return of Zeus. He hasn't been part of the Greek god group for a while now, so Zeus has returned, but also praises Hades a little bit, or gives some hope for Hades, saying, but it seems Hades has already caught on to something. I like that we're still getting demonstrations of Zeus' supremacy. Hermes, who has been like a narrator and explainer for various things, isn't aware what's going on or wasn't really catching on to Hades, but the likes of Zeus is a pretty good touch, and yeah, Zeus has returned to the spectating area. Maybe he was off doing something that we may see in a flashback, but I doubt it. Hades mentions that it's your breath, so as Zeus says, he has kind of worked out what's going on. Use your breath to strike at the crux of my power and upset the flow of my technique. So as Ares mentioned, as pretty much assumed, he weakens his opponent by sending air at them. Pretty wacky to be honest, but explained more later in the chapter. But from there we have Huang saying, I can see them all of the stars within you, and we see his eyes lighting up in this process. This is unique to when he has his blindfold removed because he can't see with the blindfold, I guess, which is pretty impressive considering he was fighting like with no sight prior to this, showing how much of a monster Huang is regardless. But with this ability he can see all the weak points of Hades to send the air out to kind of weaken him whenever he kind of wants, as Hades hasn't been able to dodge any of them thus far. From there we cut to the likes of Sasaki's group, who talk about the technique that he used, with them like kind of confused that he just used a mere puff of air to weaken his opponent. And then Sasaki talks about, within all things, there's something known as the flow of Shi or Ki, or however you pronounce it, and naturally there's a crux to that flow. So pretty much the various pressure points in one's body, or I'm just going to call it crux, that's what they're calling it in the chapter here, and I'm sorry to hit my mic, but using the air to hit the crux allows Huang to weaken their intended power, even for like killer or potential one-shot killing blows. He can fully weaken them enough to counter, which is pretty impressive. And then Izami, the other Shinsugumi, who I believe is the master of Okita, or this friend with Okita somewhat, who also is here in the story. He isn't a fighter, but he's just here as well, talks about it a little bit more, and how this isn't a very difficult thing for an unmoving target, but the fact that he's using it while in a fight, and a fight against, you know, the king of the Netherworld, may I add, questions whether this is even possible. And then Sasaki says, not a chance is what I would like to say, but it seems like this king has found a way to do it. And then Okita gets pretty like amped up, saying he would love to have a round with him as well, which does make me a little bit more hyped for Okita. Personally, I wasn't too hyped for him prior, but him wanting to, or getting excited by Huang's power here is pretty cool to see. And Sasaki showing respect to something that another fighter is doing is also pretty cool. We know Sasaki became an absolute monster at the end of his Poseidon fight. And I also like that Sasaki is having a lot of involvement in commentating for this fight, considering he did kill Poseidon, the brother of Hades, so that's pretty cool as well. And they all pretty much agree that they want to fight Huang at some point, or they would like to fight Huang at some point. From there we cut to Brunhilde, who's explained to go more about the whole crux and key thing, and that this whole thing is what Huang refers to as the stars, as we kind of saw. And that this is the hidden technique of Chi-Yu, so a technique he stole from the god he faced in his backstory that we learned last chapter. However, there's one huge issue with this technique, and this is why he had his eyes covered before. This is what she says. When man attains an excessive ability, he must lose something in return. That is what it means to be a human. So again, the whole human thing, their bodies aren't equipped to handle godly or techniques of the gods, I guess. As such, he also takes the same damage that he landed on Hades in this situation. And this is why I believe this fight could potentially be a draw. If Huang lands a potential killing blow on Hades, and then due to the damage from his eyes or whatever the deal he has to actually use it, results in him to end his life as well. As we know, gods are, as a whole, normally more durable compared to the humans. As such, if he was to land a killing blow or a blow strong enough to kill Hades, it would most likely kill him as well. Then the final page, Huang says, "I hate fighting with my eyes. That hurts," and then, you know, got the thinking meme template here, return for Record of Ragnarok, which is great to see. And that is the end of the chapter. So Huang's new revealed ability, the secret technique of Chi-Yu, pretty overpowered but fairly balanced. And yeah, I enjoyed this chapter. Purely action, no time for flashback. Some time spent on explaining Huang's ability, but the majority was then fighting, which was pretty hype to see. And this fight is still living up to be one of the best of the tournament so far, which I'm very glad for. Let me know your thoughts of the chapter down below. If you need links for chapters or don't know when the Raws or whatever come out, make sure to join the Discord. Also check out all the other stuff in the description as well. And as always, shout out to these absolute mad lads who support the channel via the Patreon. But yep, that's it guys. Peace.